Good morning and welcome back to the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Great Britain. Today I'm at the British Museum and I've come to take a look at some of my stolen stuff. Now, the British Museum is where Karl Marx spent 30 years of his life penning his masterpiece, Das Kapital, and it's also home to some of the oldest artifacts from all over the world. Personally, I found the Fayum mummies to be among the most fascinating artifacts found in the museum. And in this museum, you'll find at least 10 or more different mummies on display. And basically, as you guys know, mummies are the ancient Egyptian preserved bodies from thousands of years ago. And on these sarcophagi, if I'm saying that word correctly, you notice the face of the deceased person being drawn. And these are various Egyptian relics that are on display at the museum. And yes, you should go early because it gets very damn crowded at around 10 o'clock. So no, it actually opens at 10 o'clock. It gets very damn crowded around 11 o'clock. So as soon as you step into the museum, you should start taking a look at the mummies, because the mummies are some of the most popular artifacts to be found. Yes, you'll find even weapons, dead bodies, and all sorts of other really fascinating, horribly fascinating things. And you're not supposed to actually do vlogging, but I'm a very, very sneaky, cheeky little fellow, so I surreptitiously filmed quite a lot of things. And yes, there are also what you would describe as burial pits. Yes, burial pits in this museum that were, as well as the many different sorts of pots and pans and pottery of the ancient world, all on full display. And here we have the Greek Parthenon, and I also really enjoyed looking at these objects. Now, if you're wondering why the heads are missing, it's because, well, the robbers who wanted to sell these artifacts were not able to move the statues, so they cut the heads off, the tomb robbers, so to speak. If I don't really want to call them tomb robbers, rather the colonialists who wanted to sell these artifacts. They took the heads off those statues because they were easy to transport. It would be very difficult to transport the whole statue. And yeah, these are the busts of ancient Greece that basically tell a tale. If you look at them horizontally, you can tell you can get a story from these fascinating marble busts. They're gorgeous, aren't they? Simply lovely. But yeah, this is a really fascinating room. It's full of ancient Greek marble art, and a lot of controversy actually has occurred between the British government and the people of Greece, because there are many people in Greece who believe this is their national heritage and that the British ought to return all these objects. I actually did a whole reading about this with my Year 10 students. It's about the Greek marbles. Now, as you know, most of the stuff in this museum is culturally appropriated, so there's very little in this museum that actually comes from Great Britain. And as a matter of fact, they may as well just close shop if they were to return all their artifacts back to their original countries of origin. So it's probably going to be very, very bad for business if everything were to be returned to their country of origin. And people argue that all these artifacts ought to be returned to their respective countries of origin as a sign of goodwill by the British government towards other countries. And in fact, many of the crown jewels in the Tower of London themselves do not come from Britain, they come from India. So, understandably, many people feel that it is respectful if Britain were to return all these objects. And understandably, many people also feel that it's extremely disrespectful to be displaying the bones of actual human beings on display in front of the whole world to see, as well as the coffins of people who paid lots and lots of money to get buried with pomp and splendor. But I argue that those people are dead anyway, so people say archaeology is disrespectful, but frankly, I don't think that the people who get dug up really care, because they're dead. Doesn't really matter. And it's but it is a fair point, though, that a lot of things in the British Museum are culturally appropriated. And this is another example of a sarcophagi with a sarcophagus with a bust of a person, the person who died. It was in this room where Karl Marx penned his most important work, his Pied de Résistance, Das Kapital. He spent nearly 30 years in this room writing what would come to be known as one of the most influential pieces of non-fictional literature in the modern world, Das Kapital, which quite literally caused seismic changes in the way society was run. And it was in this room where he spent nearly 30 years writing his most important piece of work. It's understandable why Marx would spend most of his day in this room and then go home to sleep. Because the fact is that Marx lived in poverty throughout most of his life. He was constantly in debt, and he was constantly struggling to pay the bills. And had it not been for his friend and benefactor, Friedrich Engels, he would have starved. So this room was basically Marx's haven that he could run to and escape from the worries of the world and focus on his mission of writing the Bible of the workers. Well, over here we have some very interesting pieces of marble art. Yes, very, very interesting pieces. Look at these buff boys behind me. Yes, look at these buff boys with these microscopic penises. Yes, perhaps that's where the stereotype about this big muscly guy who goes to the gym and pumps up his muscles having a small pecker comes from. You always see Greek statues having really, really tiny peckers for some reason. Don't ask me why, but perhaps people back in those days were not really obsessed with phallic sizes. Not like today. I don't know where the modern obsession with phallic sizes came from, but it's definitely not in ancient Greece. And by the way, there's been a bit of a brouhaha about some public nudity scandal in Iran. Lots of members of the ACP, the American Communist Party, are calling out that girl who was dressed in a bikini, calling her out as being a degenerate. Well, look what was quite acceptable in ancient Greece and Rome. Do you think people in early Western society were prudes about nudity? Were they? No, they certainly weren't. And I don't see any reason why we should be either, because I think that we have become too puritanical when it concerns the physical body. We're too afraid of the physical body because we're too well, I think that our minds have just become too entrenched in Puritanism that at this point the very sight of a naked body is enough to send people into hives, into fits. But quite palpably, the ancient Romans and Greeks had no problem at all with male or female nudity. It's only the modern day Judeo-Christian Islamo-prudes who are so obsessed about all of this bodily modesty. You can see quite palpably people in those days had no issue with bare skin. Now behind me is a medieval Indian statue of Shiva and Parvati, the divine lovers. Now, as you notice, these two are quite scantily dressed by modern standards at least. And to modern-day Hindus, this might seem shocking, but the reality is that bodily modesty was never an issue in most non-Abrahamic religions. In most non-Abrahamic religions, they were quite free with their body modesty. And nudity was never really an issue in those days. But in fact, the saris before the colonial times were worn without blouses, but the colonizers felt that they were far too erotic, and that's why blouses became the norm, because colonizers basically added the blouses to the saris. But in the past, saris were worn without blouses. So what I'm trying to say is that many times Eastern conservatives, so to speak, I use the word conservative very loosely, have a very Eurocentric idea of what Eastern conservatism really is. Their notions of conservatism are really informed by European notions, or rather modern European notions of what is conservative. Now, a question I'd like to pose to those Western tankies who are going crazy about a brave girl in Iran who is standing up against patriarchy by wearing clothes that she wants to wear. A question I'd like to pose to these people is, if you say that this is indecency, do you then think that tribal people from South America or from Africa are being indecent? You do know that before the colonizers invaded these people's lands and forced their European culture on them, these people dressed quite freely and were happy to dress how they liked. And in fact, would you actually force these people in the Amazon, for example, to put on a Western suit and tie because it offends your delicate puritanical sensitivities? The fact of the matter is that you people are no different from those colonizers. You are the very descendants of the people like A.O. Neville, who forced European Puritanism on Aboriginal people, who forced everyone into a suit and a tie, and who basically, did not like any other way except the modest Judeo-Christian Western way of dressing. Yes, before the invasion of Abrahamic religious Puritanism and all that nonsense, people were dressing in a freer and more relaxed way. And people were probably much happier rather than the drab and sad state of affairs we find ourselves in. It's not natural to be waking up and drinking a morning coffee and putting on a suit and a tie. The suit and the tie is the most unnatural thing to have ever been created. A tie is basically a contraption around your neck that suffocates you, and a suit, well, why would you wear 3 layers in summer? It just doesn't make any sense. Puritanism makes absolutely no sense. In fact, it's the sign of a very sexually repressed mind when you cannot stand bare flesh on people. Well, in any case, my video is no substitute to actually visiting the museum, so I'm going to leave it at that. And to those of you who stayed this far, Thank you so much for watching my video, and if you will subscribe to my channel, I will be very, very grateful. Okay, now, the next video that's coming up is going to be a real banger. It's going to be about the German philosopher Karl Marx. I'm going to shoot it at his grave. So take care, everyone, and don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. Bye-bye.